Hello once again, I'm Kevin Turner and welcome to this week's Realty Talk show. A few weeks ago, property investors from around Australia and New Zealand gathered to swap ideas, to network and to listen to some very knowledgeable speakers as they shared their experiences at the inaugural PIPA Conference. And one of those keynote speakers was previous Property Investment Professionals of Australia, or as it's commonly known, PIPA, their chair. And he's also continuing board member, Peter Koulizos. He's also known as the property professor. And Peter took everyone at the conference on a property and location masterclass.
Basically, I'm looking at houses rather than units. And the plan was that the median price of these houses would outperform the median price of their respective capital city. Yep. And I used quantitative data, that's the numbers and the number crunching. And I also did a lot of quantitative research, which is really subjective or based on opinion. And I reckon the best research I did was actually being in the suburbs.
Well, our very own Bushy Martin was the MC at that event and was so impressed with the information Peter went through that he invited Peter to join him in a full Realty Talk show. And today is the day. So get your notepaper out and get your pen out, because you're going to hear some very powerful insights from Peter. Hey, if this is your first time with us, a big welcome. You're going to find us on all podcast players and through the Southern Cross Oz Stereo network. Now, if you like the show, and we certainly hope that you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. So we will be back in just a moment as Bushy kicks off this week's show.
Successful property investment is a game of finance. Do you have the right team and the right game plan? Realty Talk is brought to you by Know How Property. More than mortgage brokers, Bushy Martin and his team of investment architects set you up with a sustainable strategy structured to lower your costs, tax, risk and stress while increasing your capacity for growth. Know-how has helped over 1,900 homeowners and investors secure more than $800 million in property wealth. So get set to live more, work less, and live your legacy. Want to know how to invest in your freedom? Visit knowhowproperty.com.au. This is Realty Talk, powered by realty.com.au.
Now, we all know the old saying that you don't wait to buy real estate, you buy real estate and wait. But how do you determine the best suburb to invest in? And what's the best type of property to buy? So who can give you the best independent, impartial and educated guidance on suburb selection? There's no one better than the previous PIPA Property Investment Professionals of Australia Chair and continuing board member, Peter Koulizos, to show you how to do this. Well, I guess to sort of start off, I just want to revisit your very highly acclaimed book, Top Australian Suburbs, as a basis to actually check the outcome of some of your previous forecasts versus the reality of what happened in those areas that you actually identified as up-and-coming suburbs. So to get things underway, can you tell us a bit more about your great book?
Yeah, sure. So it was published 15 years ago, back in 2008. I picked 107 suburbs, 20 in the major capital cities, 2 suburbs in Canberra and Darwin, because they're quite small, and 3 suburbs in Hobart. So my starting point when I look at the performance of the capital growth is all based on March 2008. That's where we start from. Yep. And I made comparisons from March 2008 to December 2022, which is just 3 months short of 15 years, which is quite a long period of time. I would imagine, many property investors would have held property for that long. Probably most would have got rid of it by then. But I think it's important. One thing that I'm willing to do, Bushy, is, all right, I've been forecasting up-and-coming suburbs even before I wrote this book, even when I was teaching and before I wrote the book, so for 20 years. But I think it's important, especially as an educator, to make sure that I'm still on the right track. So I'm going back to see how good or bad those forecasts were. And, I'm going to share that with you here. And some of the story is not so good, especially for those people that live in Perth, but we'll get to that soon. But, because, I don't profess to know everything about property, and things change. Things change over time. So, what worked well in my father's day may not work so well now. So we need to keep on top of things so we can keep educating people as to how to go forward so far as investing in property is concerned.
Yeah, very well said. And as you would know better than I, property predictions a dime a dozen. but very few of them end up being accurate, and a lot of people who make them show no accountability or responsibility. Otherwise, they just conveniently forget the past and then have another go. But
That's right.
I love the way you stand by what you do, and the art and the science, as you're about to reveal to us, behind those provides really good reinforcement of why you've been so successful in that regard. So just to sort of dive into that, then, how were the top Australian suburbs selected, Peter?
So basically, I'm looking at houses rather than units.
Yep.
And the plan was that the median price of these houses would outperform the median price of their respective capital city.
Yep.
And I used quantitative data, that's the numbers and the number crunching, mainly from ABS and CourtLogic. And I also did a lot of quantitative research, which is really subjective or based on opinion. And I reckon the best research I did was actually being in the suburbs. So it took me 1 year and 1 day to write that book, because I travelled around the country, to the capital cities, all the capital cities, and went to the suburbs that I wrote about. And even though, for example, they look really good on paper or on the computer, on the desktop, when I got there, I saw, now I can see why it's so cheap, because cheap is not necessarily undervalued. So that was really good, because in the book, it also says areas to focus on and areas to avoid. And so to do that, you need to be able to walk the streets and talk with people, because local knowledge is so critical. That's where the word location comes from. It's local. So you really need to know not just the macro location, but the micro location, not just the city and the state, but the suburb and the street as well.
So true, mate. I see a lot of people in the industry now who rely very heavily on the desktop data, but unless you've mixed it with the locals, because it's the perception of an area and the changes that are happening that you just don't get to pick up on when you're doing a snapshot on the computer. So no, brilliantly said. Now, Peter, what do you consider to be the key capital growth drivers, and why then?
Sure. So it's easy to remember them as the 3 L's. Location, as you said before, is really important, the most important factor. Land and look. So if I can just quickly explain, so far as location is concerned,
yep,
you want to be close to the city or really close to the sea. Now, really close to the sea means like Esplanade or 1 or 2 streets back. Yep. Proximity to neighbouring prime suburbs. So often people want to move into that prime expensive suburb, can't afford to. They look next door, and providing it has similar housing style and streetscape, there is good potential for it to benefit from that ripple effect. Yep. Other redeeming features so far as location is concerned include being in the zone of a highly sought after high school. That's becoming more and more important all around the country.
Yep.
Land, so that's the second L. But you need to remember that land appreciates in value and buildings depreciate in value. Therefore, houses generally generate better capital growth because they sit on more land, yep, than units.
Yep. And
looks, it's 2 things. The look of the property generally means character or period style homes, and the outlook, a view. So ideally, water is number 1, a view of the CBD, or views of open space in general. So location, land and looks, and in that order as well.
Mate, your insights are pretty timeless. I remember sitting in the audience at a Steve McKnight conference back in the early noughties when you presented exactly those things, and they hold true as much today as they did then, mate. So
I think location and land has held true for ages, but I remember in my father's era, and I mention my father from time to time because he was into property as well, which is how I got into property. Yep. Nobody really wanted what they called back then old houses, but now we call them character houses. And back then, nobody really was interested in being close to the beach, because generally close to the beach was away from the city. They always wanted to be close to the city. Yep. But, we had the sea change in the early noughties, right? That started the sea change. COVID has accelerated that. I think being close to the sea is going to become even more important as time goes on.
Yeah, that access to lifestyle is, given that we're now technology enabled and can pretty much operate from anywhere without having to be in a office tower in the city, that's certainly helping to change that complexion a bit. But Sort of moving on from there, how have capital city houses performed compared to units around the nation in terms of growth over the last 20-odd years then, Peter?
Right. So those people who are fortunate enough to be watching and listening to this, you'll see the slides. So I won't go through all the numbers, but basically in every capital city except one, houses outperformed units over the last 19 years. And I reckon if you were to go back 99 years, you'd probably find the same thing. The only place where units outperformed was Darwin. And when I delved deep into the research, that was because there were a lot of new units built in Darwin. And the new units include developers' profit, and you're only going to get that once. And often what you'll find is when what used to be new units are sold the first time, it's pretty hard to sell them for at least what you paid for them. Generally, you sell them for less. So again, it just reinforces that so far as capital growth is concerned, land is important, which therefore means houses should have generally better capital growth than units.
Yeah, perfectly said. Well, to sort of whet our appetites a little bit, what are some of the highest performing suburbs within the capitals that you looked at?
Yeah, look, so we start with our hometown, Adelaide. And again, we're looking at close to the city. So we've got Kensington. So Adelaide, in that almost 15-year period, it increased 90%. And so for my predictions to be right, the suburbs had to do better than 90%. Well, Kensington did 160%. We've got Port Noarlunga South right on the beach at 127%, Torrensville at 140%. So again, that theme, close to the city, close to the sea. Brisbane was actually that's where my methodology worked best, because in that almost 15-year time period, Brisbane median house price increased 76%, but the suburbs that I selected did 120%. And, that's huge. And we got, again, for those of you that know Brisbane, I'm sure you'll know these suburbs. So Norman Park, close to the city, 158%. Brighton by the water, 150%. Sandgate by the water, 165%. Wollongabba, just across the river from the city, 151%. So again, shining through. Canberra was only a couple of suburbs. Canberra did 113%. I picked two suburbs. Braddon, there wasn't enough houses to come up with reliable data.
Yep.
Narrabundah was the other suburb, which did 111%. So strictly speaking, didn't outperform like I said it would, but pretty close. Darwin, I picked two suburbs, Milner and Rapid Creek. They both did above the 43% that Darwin did. Hobart, I picked three suburbs, Glebe, North Hobart and South Hobart. Not enough house data in Glebe to come up with some reliable stats. So Hobart did 140% in that time, which is pretty good, more than double. So just remember, 100% means it doubles, right? So
yes,
much more than double. North Hobart did 207%, which is more than tripled. South Hobart did 130%, not the 140 that I was hoping for. Melbourne, some really good suburbs. So we're looking at Carrum by the sea, 157%, Brunswick and Brunswick East, 149% and 158%, respectively. Braybrook, which is really going through that urban renewal gentrification, 187%, almost tripled when Melbourne did 127%.
Incredible.
Sydney, there are some phenomenal results here, Bushy. I mean, Sydney itself did 163%. But if I can just cherry pick the ones that did over 200%, which is tripled in value. So just to put it in simple English, if you had bought a house in these suburbs, on average, they tripled in value in less than 15 years. So we've got Darlington at 222%, Cogra at 207%, Marrickville, that's where our Prime Minister lives, smart man, 233%, his property went up in value. And Sans Souci, a lovely little waterside suburb that I love, 195%. And Ultimo, really close to the city, 205%. So if you were in Sydney at that time, you did very well. But along with the good news comes the bad news, Bushy. Perth was disastrous. So Perth When I say, I mean, on both fronts, Perth only did 23% in that time period. Sydney, 163%. So significant difference. But and on average, my suburbs that I picked only did 19%. So they did not outperform. And I can see that for a couple of reasons. Most of my suburbs in Perth were by the sea.
Yep.
So to me, that reinforced, yes, being by the sea is important, but being close to the city is even more important. Yep. And the suburbs that did outperform were close to the city. So Perth, remember, 23%, East Victoria Park, 37%, Carlisle, close to the city, 33%, Morley, 27%, and Victoria Park, which was the best performer, at 41%. So again, close to the city has shown that that's where you're going to do some good capital growth. So, yeah, look, I am sorry for those people in Western Australia who may have read my book and bought in my suburbs. I mean, on average, it didn't do too bad compared to Perth. But geez, if I'd written a book about which city to invest in, that's a big difference, 163% to 23%.
Huge. What I love about what you've just shared is again the honesty with which you presented the information. And yes, okay, Perth being pretty much a one industry town with a very strong resources focus, might not have performed over that particular 15 years. But if we jump forward to now and then the last couple of years, given it's coming off such a low base, its time in the sun is about to occur. And as you probably know better than I, the WA government's done a great job at diversifying the industry base, particularly around Perth and the southwest corridor. So while it may not have jumped to Sydney's standard during that period, it's well on its way now to starting to perform very well. So it's the old saying, it's how long you're in the market that's going to juice the fruit. So and that time period, 2008, doesn't include when Perth property prices were going nuts. 2005, 2006, if you go back to the ABS, I mean, I'm not one of those blokes that can do two things at once. I can only talk to you, Bushy. I can't go and check the ABS in the meantime. But you check out the ABS stats and you see how Perth, like it went close to 50% in 1 year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
there are a lot of ups and downs, but I've done some other research which I talked about at the PIPA Conference.
Yep.
It's time in the market, not timing. All right. You do your research, you have faith in your judgment, and just buy the right type of property in the right street, in the right suburb, in the right city, and just sit on it. Because if you're going to buy and sell, a lot of your money goes in transaction costs and capital gains tax.
After this break, Peter returns with Bushy to run through the quantitative science of suburb selection. What key outperforming indicators does Peter focus on? Find out after this break.
Property deductions can save you thousands of dollars each year. To make sure you maximise deductions, you need to work with the most experienced quantity surveyor in the country. BMT Tax Depreciation is the leading specialist in the industry. They've completed over 700,000 tax deduction schedules for residential investment and commercial properties Australia-wide. BMT guarantee to find double your fee in the first full financial year deductions. Call BMT on 1300 728 726 today for an obligation-free quote.
Realty Talk exclusive to the Property Hub.
I want to turn now to the quantitative science of suburb selection and get you to give us a rundown on what you believe are the key outperforming indicators that you focus on.
Yeah, so as I said earlier in the intro, I did quantitative research based on numbers and qualitative research. So quantitative research involved looking at the ABS, in particular demographic stats. So basically the question I ask, are the following indicators outperforming the state average? So is median weekly household income in that particular suburb increasing at a faster rate than the state average? What about the people that have bachelor degrees or above, which is very highly correlated to income?
Yes.
As is the next one, which is occupations. Professionals and managers. Is the percentage of professionals and managers increasing at a faster rate? So those three are all related to income, because it's really the people with the money that drive property prices.
Yep.
Tenure type, ideally we want more owner-occupiers, whether that they got a mortgage or whether they paid it off, rather than renters. And to me, one of the most important demographic factors is place of usual residence 5 years ago. So if we are having wealthier people moving into an area, that's where property prices go up. It's not like the people that live in the area suddenly got richer and now, you know, they're spending more money on upgrading their houses so they're worth more. It doesn't work like that. You're looking for the wealthier demographic moving in, and the ABS has two stats there. One is people that lived at a different address 1 year ago, and then people that have lived at a different address 5 years ago. I tend to look at 5 years ago, because 1 year ago could be renters moving, because they often, you know, move year by year, and they're not really going to push property prices up, but owner occupiers do. And the other one that's not demographic based is median house price. I like to see that prices are already going up, which lessens the risk rather than try and guess, oh, is this suburb going to do well or not? If you tick those boxes plus prices are going up, all right, let's get in. And it's not too late, because in particular, if I've picked it due to gentrification, gentrification takes 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
So if you got in year 2 or year 3, mate, you've still got 27 or 28 years to go.
Exactly. And I think you've focused in on one that very few people would even be aware of, and that, you know, that place of usual residence 5 years ago, looking at the changes that and the shift of income that's going to put price pressure on properties in the area. That's one that I haven't heard anyone else talk about, Peter. So I love the way you've sort of niched into that. But let's switch now across to the other side and look at some of the additional qualitative data that you consider as early indicators of gentrification that you've touched on.
Yeah, so the title of my presentation at the PIPA Conference was it's both an art and a science. So the quantitative stuff is the science. Like, it's all numbers based and formula and stuff like that.
Yep.
But the qualitative stuff is more subjective, more opinion. And one thing that I'm really keen on is having a look at gentrification. So gentrification is the process where a blue-collar suburb turns into a blue ribbon suburb. So it's like, you know, in Brisbane, West End, in Adelaide, Norwood and Unley and St. Peter's and Henley Beach, in Sydney, Paddington and Balmain, in Melbourne, suburbs like Richmond and St Kilda is also going through that, almost finished that gentrification process.
Yeah.
So that's not to say that all of my suburbs are based on gentrification, but that's like another kicker. Like, if that's happening as well, it's pretty hard to go wrong if all these other demographic factors, you've ticked the box and this is happening. So basically gentrification was first observed 60 years ago in London, where the more affluent and educated class were buying and renovating Georgian and Victorian terraces in the West End of London, which wasn't so flash back then.
Yep.
And two of the key property, people and place elements that are globally common, not just Australia, include a high proportion of character, as we call them in South Australia, or period style, as they call them in the eastern states, buildings and homes. A wealthier demographic moves into the area, and the suburbs need to be close to the city or close to water. So maybe a river is okay, but generally close to the sea. And so when you factor those sorts of things in, I look at property. You know, it is in the area, are the gardens neat and tidy? Is housing well kept and owners are willing to spend money on major renovations?
Yep.
Or are the front yards of houses full of car wrecks and old lounges? You know, I probably wouldn't be buying in an area where there's lots of car wrecks and old lounges in the front yard. The people, are there many young children and newly built childcare centres, which again shows us a younger, wealthier demographic moving in with well-dressed parents pushing prams? Or is it an area with graffiti, vandalised bus shelters, big, you know, burnout tyre marks on the road? Are there hipster residents? Sorry for all the hipsters reading this. I'm not having a go at you, but this is just something that I've observed. Yeah. Are there hipster residents riding around on vintage bikes? If it's a steel frame bike, you are probably in a gentrifying suburb. If it's a fixie, which means it's only got one gear, then you are definitely in a gentrifying suburb. And the other place indicators that I look at, like cars are a reflection of the people that live in the area. What sort of cars are people driving? I mean, big black BMWs and Mercs and Audis, it's already a wealthy area.
Yeah.
But the smaller black BMWs and Audis and Lexus, then we've got some aspiring people moving in. So that gives us, hope that area is going to improve in value. Sounds, you don't want to be too close to factories or a main road. Other little quirky things is there art appearing on electricity poles and public buildings. Gin distilleries, craft breweries, hot yoga studios. These are classic signs of an up-and-coming suburb, and in particular an area gentrifying. Because you can imagine, like gin is quite expensive, craft beer is quite expensive, as is going to yoga. So, they're not going to succeed really well in a blue-collar area. But as the blue-collar area changes and wealthier people move in, then yes, they're happy to pay $15 for a shot of gin, or $12 for a glass of craft beer, or $25 for a yoga session. So these are the sorts of things that help me select the top suburbs that people should be investing in.
And beautifully said, because you're only going to be able to pick those things up if you're getting down and dirty in the actual locations to be able to see those little bitty details that are giving you a really good indication of where things are going. What about other qualitative indicators that you take notice of then, Peter?
Yeah, so if we're looking at property, we're looking at not just the homes being upgraded, but the commercial buildings.
Yep.
If we're looking at place, there's public seating available, the roads are being fixed up, the footpaths are being fixed up. Generally, I mean, if you walk into an area and if you know what you're looking for, you can spot it. Communal gardens, like often we'll have a strip of lawn out the front of our house, right? So there'll be the footpath, strip of lawn, and the road. But often in these up-and-coming areas where there's a great sense of community, you'll have a garden, not just a flower garden, but maybe even a veggie garden. These are the sorts of things to be looking at. And there's no guarantees here. Like I said at the conference, is my methodology a sure bet you're going to make money? No, because I didn't get 100%. But is it a pretty safe bet? I think it is.
Absolutely. Talk to us. I remember you talking at length about you look at cafes in the way. Yeah. Give us a bit of a rundown on that one.
Yeah, sure. So you walk into the cafe. All right. Is the cafe? Is the coffee served in an area up and coming? So do they have coconut milk, oat milk, rice milk? Whoever thought you'd get milk out of rice? But there you go. And their tea offerings, are they green, jasmine, chamomile? And when you go and have a coffee there, no two tables or two chairs are alike. And the cup and the saucer are not alike. And the chair, you swear that you used to sit on that chair at your grandmother's house. Or you go to the pub and on a Sunday afternoon, like there's no sport on the TV. You can't hear the ting, ting, ting of pokies, but you can hear a jazz band in the courtyard. And the only beers that you can buy that are on tap are craft beers. And also walking in the main street. If there's lots of for lease and for sale signs, that's not the sign of a healthy economy. But in a gentrifying area, what you might find is older style buildings, but new and up and coming businesses.
Yes.
Because once you get more and more of those new and up and coming businesses, then the money is spent on the building. So you might find in an old building, there might be somebody selling really expensive clothes. Whereas before it used to be a $2 shop.
Yes.
But over time, the building will also be upgraded. So look, Bushy, there's lots of things to look for. You just got to know what you are looking for.
Yeah, and what it means too when you do see it, which you've described beautifully there. So in terms of quantifying some of the exercise, and again, you've touched on this a little bit earlier, where and how do you find the main data that supports your investigations, Peter?
Right. So generally it'll be the ABS stats. So those people that look at ABS, they probably go to the census and look up quick stats, which is fine. But some of the other, what I call fine-grained data, where you get more detail, then you have to look somewhere else, something called community profiles. And again, for those people that are looking at the listening and watching this, you'll see on the slides some of the tabs that I've highlighted where you can find this information. And so basically you're looking at, for example, 2011, 2016 and 2021 data.
Yep.
So if you can get at least 3 sets of data, that's 10 years worth, that's pretty good.
Yep.
But, you know, you don't expect to find all the data in the same tab. So, for example, place of usual residence 5 years ago in 2011 is in tab B39. Don't go looking for it in B39 in 2016. I don't know why they don't make it easier, the ABS. So that's in G42. And then you're looking for it in 2021, it's in G45. But anyway, if you can have a look at the ABS data and have a poke around, you'll be able to find it. And some people may think, oh, that's too hard. But you're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars here. I mean, either you pay somebody else to do the research for you that you trust, or at least do some of it yourself. All right, and so you may not like stats, because a lot of people that did stats, it's probably their worst subject at uni, which is my worst subject at uni. Even though I don't teach stats, but to do some of the qualitative stuff. Go and have a look at the suburb.
Yeah.
One thing I did when I was writing the book was I would ring up the police and say, I'm looking to buy a property in the area. Can you let me know which areas that I should be avoiding? Walking around, you may not see that. There are probably some signs, but you've got to be really astute. But, talking to police, talking to the local shop owners is just so valuable to give you an idea of what's happening in the area.
Absolutely. I remember years ago, Peter, after the GFC, we jumped on a plane and went to the States. And one of the key things we look for when we were looking at an area, we'd make sure we're in the area just as it got dark.
Yes, good one.
Because that's when you really saw what the area is like. Because an area could look quite good during the day.
Yeah, because everyone's at work or out and about, but come home at night, different story.
Absolutely right. So, and again, I think you touched on a really good point there. If you're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars with the intention of making hundreds of thousands of dollars, if you have to look under different tabs to find the information across the years, that's going to separate the sheep from the goats in relation to those that are really serious about informing themselves before they put their hard-earned cash down.
Stay with us, more to come. When we return, Bushy asks Peter for his step-by-step approach to selecting the top up-and-coming suburbs. He does that by using a case study. Back in a moment with Peter and Bushy. Hi, just before we go back to the show, I want to spend a few seconds and tell you about a book that was sent to me that's now become my go-to reference when I'm looking for inspiration about property investment. Sometimes it's not about knowing all the answers. It's certainly more important to know what questions to ask. This book by Rusty is called The Property Wealth Blueprint, and it's one that you don't read just once and then put it away. It stays out as a reference. It's a book that you go back to time and time again, as I do, because it's packed with personal experience and with great examples of how to get property investment right. It's very frank, it's to the point. And as you can see here, I've needed to bookmark several points, and I can tell you that it's a constant companion on my desk here. The remarkable thing is that it's absolutely free on Rusty's website, getrare.com.au. Get Rare. It's a gateway to a richer life. The website there for you again, getrare, rare.com.au. So get this book, get it for yourself.
So to bring all this together then, Peter, can you sort of take us through a case study to demonstrate your step-by-step approach to selecting the top up-and-coming suburbs then?
Yeah, so there were 7 steps that I used. So, and people can do this themselves. because remember, I wrote the book 15 years ago. I'm not planning on writing another one. So if you want to update it, you'll have to do your own research. So you look for suburbs close to the city and on the coast.
Yeah.
Then you find the cheaper suburbs within that selection, keeping in mind cheaper doesn't necessarily mean undervalued.
Yeah.
Are the cheaper suburbs adjacent and the more expensive suburbs? Are the cheaper suburbs similar in nature to the more expensive suburbs, in particular streetscape and housing style? So you can't say, well, here's an expensive suburb and here's a cheap suburb which is full of factories next door. Well, unless the factories are going to move, it's always going to be cheap. So that's one illustration. Are the same types of houses cheaper in the prospective up-and-coming suburb? Does the other quantitative data support this price and property data? And does the qualitative data support your price, property, and quantitative data? So 7, I wouldn't say simple steps, but 7 straightforward steps that do require a bit of work, especially if you're looking at the quantitative data that can help you. Yeah. And I put that together and used it as a case study. And I selected a suburb in Adelaide called Underdale.
Yep.
Now, Underdale is in the western suburbs of Adelaide. So it's between the city and the sea. It's sandwiched in between. So if we look at the steps here, so I looked at the suburbs close to the city, and Underdale was one of them. Yeah. Underdale, step number 2, find the cheaper suburb. Underdale was one of those. Are the cheaper suburbs adjacent to the more expensive suburbs? Yes, because Underdale is sandwiched in between Torrensville and Lockley. So Underdale's median house price $835,000, Torrensville $962,000, not a lot more, but Lockley's $1.11 million. So there you've got a cheaper suburb sandwiched in between 2 more expensive suburbs.
Yep.
Are the same types of houses cheaper in the prospective up-and-coming suburb? And again, those people are lucky enough to view it. And look, if you're not viewing it, I've said it enough times, you should get on the YouTube channel or on the website and check out these slides, because I picked 3 comparable properties. So 3 in Torrensville and 3 very similar properties in Underdale. And you could see that the houses, so the same house was cheaper in Underdale than Torrensville. So what's happening is people would love to live in Lockley's, but they can't afford the 1.1 mil. Yeah. They can't afford Torrensville at 962, but maybe they can afford Underdale at 835, which is about $250,000 cheaper than Lockley's. And you're basically, because it's next door, you're basically the same distance to the city and the same distance to the sea. And then I also looked at the quantitative data, so the ABS data. So, you know, was the median weekly household income in Underdale growing at a faster rate than the state? Yes. Was the number of people with bachelor degrees or more growing faster than the state? Yes. Professionals and managers percentage was increasing faster than the state. The percentage of people that own their own house outright with a mortgage was increasing faster than the state. Very importantly, the place of usual residence 5 years ago, there was a higher percentage of different people living in Underdale than the state, and the median price was already increasing. Just a couple of, not disclaimers, but a couple of things to watch out for. Because Underdale is so close to the city, I had a look at the educational institute that people were attending. Because if you've got a high proportion of students, as we tend to have in our suburbs that are close to the city, that can skew the data. Yes, we've got a high proportion of students and a high number of people with bachelor degrees because they're doing masters, but it doesn't mean that they earn a ton of money because they're only students. Yeah. So that's something to watch out for. So basically, look, you know, in a nutshell, I looked at the quantitative data on the computer. I looked at the qualitative data, you know, drove around the streets and picked houses that were alike in the more expensive suburb, Torrensville, and compared to the undervalued suburb, Underdale. And, you know, in my opinion, you know, Underdale is a great suburb to invest in. You know, we're talking long term here. You leave your money there for 5, 10, 15 years ideally, and you should do better than the Adelaide average based on my research. And don't forget, Bushy, I think we forgot to mention, I'm a man that puts his money where his mouth is.
Exactly.
So I actually invest in property as well, and I do take my own advice. And I own investment properties in Port Noarlunga and Port Noarlunga South. I own a property in Torrensville. So, I do take my own advice. So again, it's not a sure bet, but please find me a sure bet, and I'll be happy to bet on it on Saturday at the races. But I don't think you're going to do that. But I think, the more research you do, the more risk you take out of it, which is really important, because you may only buy one investment property, and it's going to be the most money you spend on any one occasion. Please do some research, please.
Yeah, absolutely key, and I think you picked a really good example with Underdale, and being a fellow Adelaidean, I used to play field hockey down at the Adelaide CAE on the.
Well, I used to go to Underdale High School.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Very well.
And I mean, if you look at what's happened there with the closure of the Adelaide CAE, and developers have got in there and they've seized the opportunity with residential to redevelop some of those areas, particularly along the Torrens.
The linear park here is fantastic. Yeah.
Just a beautiful amenity. So I think that's sort of a really great shining example of bringing together all of that, the art and the science, as you've managed to tease that together and get a number of different points reinforcing the same message, really. That there's plenty of opportunity in that space. So for those that are listening and watching, take heed of those 7 steps and all of the other data that Peter's shared with us. And if you combine those, then as you well said, Peter, you're de-risking the exercise and giving yourself the best possible chance. So sort of bring that all to a head then. What are your final words in relation to selecting top growth suburbs then, Peter? So
look, I spent a good portion of my career as an educator focusing on suburbs. Maybe I should have spent it on cities instead. Remember that comparison? Perth 23%, Sydney 163%. But if you want to try and select which city you should be investing in, you need to be looking at macroeconomic data, not property economic data. So some of the macroeconomic, one of my students did a wonderful paper on factors to look for for selecting cities for investing in property. Yep. So money supply was particularly important to Sydney, household consumption for Brisbane, and in Adelaide, Perth and Melbourne, it was state final demand. So basically what my student said was that these factors were correlated. So one goes up, so does the other. So it doesn't mean that one causes the other. You could probably imply that, a bit dangerous, but you could imply that. But certainly they are not leading indicators. Because ideally, we're looking for leading indicators, and the quantitative stats that I gave you, especially those that relate to gentrification, are leading indicators. So you can, if it's happening, excellent. Go buy there, and all right, it might be 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years into it, but you've still got 25 or more years to go of that upswing in prices. So look, you don't need to be a rocket science to invest in property, but you do need some science, all right? You do need to do some research.
Yeah, it's reinforced time and time again. And as you've said, if you're not prepared or don't have the time to do the research yourself, find someone that you trust that's got a proven track record of doing the research on the key data points and the qualitative walk the neighbourhood data, boots on the ground stuff that's going to bring it all together. So look, thanks again for all of these really informative and timely insights, Peter. The book might have been written 15 odd years ago, but the principles that you've applied are I think more applicable now, given that we've gone through a major growth curve that's sort of, the tides floated all property ships. Those leading indicators that you're talking about are going to be more important than ever in terms of determining ongoing growth, given that a lot of areas that have had capital growth brought forward may well flatline for an extended period of time without those ongoing drivers to get behind it. So I really want to thank you for giving that perfect balance between that intuitive art and the data science of superior location and property selection, which is like no other, Peter. And you provide yet another really good example of the benefits of working with like-minded independent professionals that PIPA, or the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, represents. So for those listening, if you want to engage someone or work with someone who takes Peter's approach to property from that independent professional perspective, jump on pipa.asn.au. And in closing, Peter, I really want to thank you again, and let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Bushy. Always a pleasure to do a podcast with a fellow Adelaidean, because there's not many of us. The property industry is generally over in the eastern states, so it's wonderful to do stuff with you. And I didn't give Adelaide a plug, and I'll ask you this question, Bushy. You could probably guess. Out of the last 20 years, right, Hobart was the best performing capital city. We're talking about cities rather than suburbs. You know which was after Hobart?
Good on
Adelaide, mate.
Absolutely.
So we did all right, didn't we?
We did. We used to be
the stuff in the newspapers and on the net. It's all about Sydney house prices and Melbourne house prices. Nobody really cares about us, but we're doing all right.
Well, I tell you what, I used to refer to us as the Stephen Bradbury of property, Peter. But I tell you what, in the last couple of years, we've shot to the front of the line.
Outperformed since COVID, since June 2020. We have far outperformed anybody. Yeah,
absolutely. No, well, always great to rub shoulders, mate. We should be catching up for coffee ourselves and checking.
I think we should. You need to come to the city. I know you live down there in Coromandel Valley. Is that right? Clarendon. Sorry. Next time you're in town, give us I'll shout you a coffee at the uni. They make really good coffee there. Even better, they're lemon muffins.
There you go. And
I don't know if you're a sweet tooth, but I'll shout you a lemon muffin.
I am, mate. And let's make sure they've got plenty of those different milks on the show. Okay, Peter, thanks again. We'll catch up with you soon, mate. Bye for now.
Thanks, matey.
Property depreciation is the natural wear and tear of a building and its assets. Property investors can claim depreciation as a tax deduction each financial year. Depreciation is a non-cash deduction. This means you don't need to spend any money in order to claim it. On average, BMT tax depreciation fined residential investors almost $9,000 in first full financial year deductions. Call BMT on 1300 728 726 today for an obligation-free quote.
Subscribe now to Realty Talk. It's out every week.
And that brings us to the end of this week's show. A big thanks to Peter and Bushy for a really great show, full of a lot of information. Make sure you don't miss a single episode of Realty Talk or Bushy's Get Invested podcast, both delivered to you each and every week. And you can do that by subscribing to the Property Hub now on your favourite podcast player or wherever you're listening to or watching this show. Thanks to our supporters and content partners, realty.com.au, BMT Tax Depreciation, Know How Property Finance, Get Rare Property, and Apiro Marketing. I'm Kevin Turner, and on behalf of Bushy and the Property Hub team, we look forward to seeing you again next week.